Ford's 1968 annual stockholder meeting was shaping up to be as dry an affair as all the others. That was until shareholder Anna Musioli stood up to address company leadership. I have just one complaint. Thunderbird came out years ago. It was a beautiful sports car, and then you blew it up to the point where it lost its identity. And now the same thing is happening with the Mustang. Why can't you just leave a sports car small? I mean, you keep blowing them up and starting another little one. Blow that one up and start another one. I mean, why don't you just leave them? Musioli may have had a financial interest in the automaker, but make no mistake, this was personal. She owned a 1965 Mustang and became disillusioned with the larger, heavier models that had been released in recent years. And the fattest ponies were yet to come. Many of the other stockholders felt the same way. A round of applause followed Musioli's speech. CEO and Chairman Henry IV II said that they would keep what she said in mind, and assured her that they would have a car more to her liking in the future. This was not an empty promise. Lee Iacocca echoed those concerns during a November 1969 company management conference at West Virginia's Greenbrier Resort. He acknowledged that the bigger Mustangs were alienating those who wanted a sporty, compact coupe. Compared to the original, the 1970 model was 6 inches longer, 3 inches wider, and hundreds of pounds heavier. Yearly production fell from over 600,000 in 1966 to about 190,000 in 1970. It would hit a low of about 125,000 in 1972, when the first generation Mustang was about the biggest that it would get. The book Mustang by Joe McCarthy quotes Iacocca, who essentially said that the car's original market was still there. It was Ford that left the market behind. This was more than a gut feeling on Iacocca's part. Pony cars shrunk from 10.6% of the market in 1967 to 3% by 1973. Meanwhile, small car market share had skyrocketed from 23% in 1964 to 40% by 1973. Sporty compacts such as the Datsun 240Z and Toyota Celica were becoming increasingly appealing to consumers. That segment enjoyed a 300% sales increase in a 7-year span. They totaled 311,000 in 1972. Iacocca was all too aware of this, saying, "When I look at the foreign car market, I see that 1 out of 5 of these cars is a quote-unquote sporty compact. I know something's happening. Look what the Toyota Celica started." Even Ford had started selling a foreign compact of its own in the Capri. It debuted at the 1969 Brussels Motor Show in January, but didn't appear on American shores until April of the following year. The car drew comparisons to the original Mustang. It used the underpinnings of an existing compact, the Cortina in this case, and was designed to have a sporting character. Although the cars were sold through Lincoln Mercury dealers, they didn't have any brand-specific badging. It was known simply as the Capri. The automaker was taken aback by just how popular it was out of the gates. More than 15,000 were sold in the US between April 1970 and the launch of the 1971 models in the fall. Ford moved another 150,000 through 1972. Only one other import outsold it for a time, the Volkswagen Beetle. The press loved the Capri as well. Carvin Driver wrote that it had excellent road feel and a well-sorted exterior. One of its weaker elements was its anemic 1.6-liter engine. This issue was amended with the addition of a 2-liter inline-4 and a 2.6-liter V6. In a 1971 review, Road & Track called the Capri, quote, "a solidly built, compact, and sporty car that was fun to drive." So the formula for the next generation Mustang was in place. Or was it? Ford had not one, but 2 sporty compacts in the pipeline. The first, code-named Ohio, was envisioned to be the second generation Mustang. It would be based on the Maverick, have a 103-inch wheelbase, and arrive in showrooms during the 1974 model year. The Arizona was to be based on the yet-released Pinto. It would be sold under a different model name and be released about a year after the Ohio. Ford prioritized the Maverick-based car throughout much of 1970 and 1971. Extensive focus testing and evolving marketplace dynamics had caused the pendulum to swing in the other direction. In Mustang, America's pioneer pony car, Gary Wittenberg details one clinic that the automaker held in Long Beach. Participants were shown a selection of compact and subcompact cars. Ford also threw in 3 Arizona design studies, as well as a variation on the Fiera, a car aimed at developing markets. Those present showed much more interest in the sporty subcompacts, cars such as the Triumph GT6 Plus and the aforementioned 240Z. Comfort, sharp driving dynamics, and sporty design were among the most important factors to them. Rear seat space wasn't as much of a priority, and half of them wanted a 6-cylinder engine on the options list. That last point played a crucial role in the Ohio versus Arizona debate. Ford initially decided against using a version of the Caprice V6, as it didn't think the factory in Cologne, Germany could build them in sufficient quantities. It instead opted to use an inline 6. Design VP Gene Bortney and Advanced Design Director Don Della Rosa feared that using such a long engine could make the car dimensionally too large. For the moment, their hands were tied. A straight 6-equipped Pinto-based test car was created. Bill Ennis, Ford's executive vice president of North American operations, drove it and was very impressed with the package. He even recommended that the Arizona should become the next Mustang, rather than the larger Ohio. Advanced Product Planning Manager Nat Adamson formally submitted the Arizona to management in July 1971. Inez's enthusiasm for the project must have rubbed off on them, because not only did they approve it to be the next Mustang, but they also canceled the Ohio altogether. Its release date was also pushed up to the 1974 model year. Adamson was named the Light Car Planning Manager for his efforts. Production was set to begin in July 1973. The team had just over 2 years to work out design, engineering, and tooling. To help move things along, Ford decided to bring one of its recent acquisitions into the process. Lee Iacocca and a few other executives flew to Italy to meet with Ghia. The company purchased a controlling stake in the firm in November 1970. At the time, it was headed by Alejandro De Tomaso. Tom Jarda, meanwhile, managed its design efforts. Ford invested in Ghia in large part because of its styling and prototyping expertise. Knowing this, the automaker challenged them to create proposals for a compact sporty car. Ghia didn't disappoint. It delivered a running car to Ford in just 53 days. This was a boon for the team because it gave designers and engineers something physical to scrutinize. Iacocca reckons that, without it, they would have been in the clay and paper phase for another year or two. The Ancona, as it was known, hardly resembled Mustangs of the past. It featured a wedge-shaped profile, angular styling, simulated pillar intakes, and a grille set between a pair of retractable headlights. A side-of-it motif was the only recognizable feature on the car. Ghia delivered a second car to Ford sometime later. The notchback was decidedly more European in nature, with expansive glasswork, thin pillars, and minimal front and rear overhangs. Wittenberg states that it also had a pagoda-style roof, but it doesn't really come through in this photograph. The 2 Ghia cars contributed to one of the more contested Mustang-related issues. Management wanted to focus on a single body style. The convertible wouldn't be part of their plans. Waning demand, safety concerns, and rising insurance premiums saw to that. They were split between the notchback and fastback configurations. Demand for them was pretty much even. It would have been wise to focus on both models and satisfy both customer bases, but Ford thought otherwise. Bortney also reasoned that the Mustang's introduction would have been more impactful if there was just one car in the spotlight, rather than 2. Ford launched a company-wide design competition in August 1971, partly to come to a conclusion on the matter, and partly to accelerate development on the Mustang. Something similar happened during the creation of the original. Several of the automaker's design studios created full-scale mock-ups for evaluation. This time, the Ford, Lincoln Mercury, Advanced, and Interior studios would be pitted against one another. Like the previous contest, they were each given a set of hard points and told to come up with styling concepts. About 150 sketches were made in total. From these, modelers fleshed out 50 of them in clay. Occasionally, the automaker shipped these models out to focus groups to gauge public opinion. They would then be shipped back to Dearborn for further development. In September, Ford held a clinic in San Diego. Although the participants leaned toward the fastbacks, the results were too close to draw any serious conclusions. The data from another session in Dearborn was even more in favor of the fastbacks. Their appeal was twice that of the notchbacks. A clinic in Anaheim seemed to be the knockout punch. Participants greatly preferred the sportier proposals and rejected a notchback that Advanced Design had developed. It performed so poorly that it became known as the Anaheim car. 5 models were formally submitted to the final evaluation in November. They were all fastbacks, aside from the Anaheim car. Despite the cold reception that it received from the focus groups, studio chief De La Rosa still believed in it. Leadership gave the notchback some consideration, but in the end, they went with a model from Lincoln Mercury. The design was sent to the feasibility studio to see if there would be any difficulties in producing it. Ford held another clinic in San Francisco in February 1972, a full 3 months after the competition had concluded. It wanted to gauge demand and pricing expectations for the car. The winning fastback would be there, along with a few other models. A few days before it was set to begin, Iacocca ordered them to pull the Anaheim car out of storage and include it in the evaluation. Why? More than likely, it was there to give those present something to compare the Lincoln Mercury model to. Perhaps Iacocca just had a soft spot for it. Nat Adamson flew in from Detroit for the event. After spending several hours cooped up in an airplane, he wanted nothing more than to collect himself at his hotel. Someone told him to head to the Cow Palace, the site of the evaluation, as soon as possible. The Anaheim car was performing far beyond their expectations. It earned the highest rating on an absolute scale, and got a clear majority of the first place votes over the fastback. Ford could not ignore these results. It put the notchback Mustang back into the plants a mere 16 months before the start of production. The company's indecisiveness had put it in a tough spot. Time restrictions didn't allow for it to develop 2 completely different bodies. The team had to find a way to get the notchback roof onto the fastback body and make it look natural. Like the original Mustang, the new model would make use of existing components and mechanicals. That model was built upon the bones of the Falcon. This one would use the subcompact Pinto as a foundation. A Motor Trend article states that development engineer Paul Nyquist began with a Pinto that was stretched 2 inches. Less and less of the donor curve remained as his work progressed. Car and Driver says that the 2 cars only share brakes, steering gears, rear axles, and a portion of their floor pans. In a 2016 Hagerty article, John Clore, the enthusiast communications manager for Ford Performance, remarked, "There is less Pinto in a Mustang II than there is Falcon in a 1965 Mustang." You'll recall that Ford insisted on offering an inline 6 on the new model instead of a more compact V6. Bortonay and De La Rosa objected to this, but realized that the best course of action was to give the higher-ups what they wanted. The Advanced Studio got to work on a subcompact clay model sized to accommodate the straight 6. Iacocca didn't take to it very well when he had a look at it. De La Rosa told him that if they wanted a smaller car, then they needed to start with a smaller engine. Iacocca agreed. It and the Caprice V6 came out of the same factory in Cologne, Germany. Road and Track wrote that they only shared valve trains, rods, and distributors. A new block was required because displacement was increased from 2.6 liters to 2.8 liters. In a Mustang First, the model would also be available with a 4-cylinder. The base 2.3-liter Lima inline 4 made 88 horsepower. And what about the V8? Well, there wouldn't be one. In a 1973 Motor Trend article, Iacocca stated that he had driven a V8-powered Mustang II. He thought it was, quote-unquote, fantastic, but went on to say that they wanted, quote, to keep some discipline in the system. According to him, it would have been overweight before it got to market, so Ford limited the power plant selections down to the smaller engines, at least in the US. The company did offer a V8 Mustang in Mexico. Hot Rod magazine tested such a car for its June 1974 issue. The Mexican market required that cars offered there have a high level of local content. The article states that 60% of each vehicle sold must be made in the country. Their Mustang's engine, transmission, suspension, seats, and interior trim were all made there. Ford didn't build the Lima i4 or the Cologne V6 there. In the Mexican market, it was either going to be a V8 Mustang or no Mustang at all. Its engine was rated at 205 horsepower and a 295 pound-feet of torque, though keep in mind that these figures are gross, not net. The V8 Mustang II was more on the expensive side, coming in at a price equivalent of $5,600. For the money, it was a capable machine. Perhaps it was a preview of what was in store for the American market. With the horsepower wars fading from memory, comfort and luxury were becoming major areas of emphasis. Subcompact cars of the day had a difficult time mitigating noise, vibration, and harshness, or NVH. Ford wanted to break away from this with the Mustang II. Budgetary constraints made achieving this difficult, but engineers did come up with a few intriguing solutions. The engine and front suspension are mounted on an isolated subframe. Road shock and vibrations were lessened before they reached the cabin. The Mustang II also used 50% more chassis insulation than the 1973 model. Wittenberg notes that there was more there than in many other, larger cars. The factory laid a type of insulation down on the floor, which melted as the car went through the paint making oven. It eventually hardened and bonded with the floor. Rack and pinion power steering was also on the options list. According to the Mustang Story, a paper published by Ford, the Mustang II was the first American-built car to offer a power option on rack and pinion steering. The new model was a return to form in a few respects, and a clear departure from tradition in others. One could argue that the car had changed so much that it was no longer a Mustang. Leaving the name in the past and forging a new legacy was certainly a possibility, but the automaker ultimately decided against it. Over 3 million first-generation Mustangs left the factory, and while the model had strayed from its roots a bit, that moniker still resonated with consumers. Ford wanted to communicate that this was a new era for the car. Its PR department reasoned that simply calling it a Mustang would imply that it was in the same vein as the ones that came before it. Naming it Mustang II would let the public know that this was a new kind of car with new goals for a new automotive landscape. Production began on time despite the fastback notchback hangup. Ford formally introduced the Mustang II to the press on August 28, 1973, though those close to the situation knew that a new model was on the way for months. Iacocca had announced the car back in April. It was worlds apart from the stallion that it replaced. Compared to the 1973 Mustang, it was 19 inches shorter and 4 inches narrower. Wheelbase length was down nearly 13 inches. Weight savings were between 400 and 500 pounds. The original Mustang, meanwhile, was 6.5 inches longer in overall length, 2 inches narrower, and nearly a foot longer in terms of wheelbase. The Mustang II was between 145 and 200 pounds heavier though, while the dimension shrank, the sticker price swelled. A base 1973 hardtop was $2,847. Advertising for the Mustang II highlighted the starting price of $2,895. Several other sources give a base price of $3,081. The 1973 Mustang Grande could be had for $2,946. A 1974 Ghia, the successor to that trim, cost $3,427. And the new Mach 1 commanded a $500 premium over the previous one. Peter Henshaw writes that the car could be optioned to an eye-watering $4,500. While that was a pretty penny, the point of entry wasn't too unreasonable. Shoppers looking to get their hands on lightly equipped models found cars with window stickers at and above the $4,000 mark. Ford had incorrectly predicted that there would be great demand for heavily optioned Mustang IIs. This misstep resulted in disappointing sales out of the gates. They were predicted to be around 31,000 for the first month, but dealers only moved around 18,000 in that span. The automaker switched up its strategy, ordering less expensive models from the factory and further emphasizing its affordability in advertising. Auto journalists also had a lukewarm reception to the car. Car Driver liked the exterior styling, remarking that it was less of a sexy Pinto and more of a scaled-down Torino. Build quality and fit and finish were also strong points. The interior had good all-around visibility, excellent ergonomics, clear instrumentation, and upscale touches throughout. The seats were the weakest link inside. Testers wrote that they didn't provide good overall support. Things unraveled on the road. Car Driver's test vehicle weighed over 3,100 pounds. While power figures weren't available at the time, they predicted that the engine was less potent than the smaller, older V6 in the Capri due to ignition and carburetor controls. That was a problem because the Capri weighed about 700 pounds less than the Mustang II. driving dynamics were negatively affected by the extra heft. The magazine used some choice words to describe its toothless handling. Steering wasn't as quick or precise as they would have liked, and the rear drums were prone to early lockup. The magazine wrote that the performance simply didn't match their expectations. Carcraft published a review the same month and echoed those sentiments, calling the interior a pleasant surprise and lamenting the power-to-weight ratio. The Mustang II was marketed as the right car at the right time, but its initial reception was disappointing to say the least. Ford had no idea how accurate that slogan truly was. October 18, 1973 was the day the oil crisis hit. The United States was hit especially hard by the event. The Chicago Fed states that the price of a barrel of oil increased from $3.38 in September to $6.92 in January 1974, and by March, it had risen to $11.10. This led to soaring gas prices, long fueling station queues, and countrywide shortages. Consumer tastes changed as a result. Full-size domestic sales fell by 50%. Numbers for some bog standard subcompacts, such as the Pinto and Vega, also took a hit. Luxury barges and other upscale cars shook off the downturn, and so did the Mustang II. It was a small, efficient, and relatively comfortable vehicle. Just over 296,000 of them were sold during the 1974 model year. Production exceeded 386,000 units in that span. According to America's Favorite Pony Car, it had earned a 4.75% share of the industry's total output. That hadn't happened since 1967. The sales split between the body styles and trim levels shed some light on where buyer preferences were in the wake of the oil crisis. A whopping 47% of buyers opted for the base two-door model. Another 22% of them were the upscale Ghia model. The 2+2 fastback made up another 19% of sales. Bringing up the rear was the Mach 1, which represented just 11% of overall sales. Motor Trend named the Mustang II its 1974 Car of the Year. The magazine wrote that it was the right size at the right time for the greatest number of motorists. Journalists were also won over by its sheer personalization and premium feel. Other buff books still hadn't warmed up to the car. A January 1974 Road and Track review went over many of the same issues as past write-ups. Their Mach 1 had a sticker price of nearly $4,500. It noted that the car was $1,000 more expensive and 700 pounds heavier than a similarly equipped Toyota Celica. Fuel efficiency was a bit disappointing. They only achieved 16.5 miles per gallon in their testing. And while they appreciated the interior appointments, they preferred the Capri's more straightforward cockpit. 1975 saw the much anticipated return of the V8 in the American market. Here, it made 129 net horsepower and 213 pound-feet of torque. Dual catalytic converters brought the former down to 122 for California-bound examples. Gas mileage was down to between 13.7 and 15.9 miles per gallon. An optional auxiliary fuel tank added another 3.5 gallons, bringing the total up to 16.5 gallons. For 1975, the V8 was only available with an automatic transmission. There wasn't a true consensus on why this was the case. Road and Track reported that the 4-speed wouldn't fit into the existing transmission tunnel. Ford decided that it didn't want to spend the extra money to make it work. Mexican market Mustangs had a different transmission tunnel and could therefore accommodate it without issue. Motor Trend wrote that the manual V8 car required recertification, while the automatic V8 did not. The car got into the hands of Road and Track, which thought it was a considerable improvement over the other engine options. Handling was surprisingly good, despite the 60-40 weight split, and steering feel in all models was a bit sharper, thanks to a mid-cycle update. The 15 miles per gallon that they recorded was just 1.5 lower than what they achieved in the 1974 Mach 1. Trading the fuel economy for the performance gains was a no-brainer. On the other end of the spectrum was the MPG package. Fuel efficiency became an even greater focus here. It featured the base 2.3-liter engine, a catalytic converter, and a 3.18:1 rear-axle ratio. Ford rated the stick-shift version at 23 city 34 highway, and the automatic at 21 city and 30 highway. About 200,000 cars were sold for 1975. Catalytic converters, previously only equipped on California market and MPG models, became standard equipment for 1976. The Stallion appearance package added a unique two-tone paint job. Ford also resurrected the COBRA name, though those expecting increased performance were in for a letdown. It was little more than an appearance package. Ford Incorporated, an automotive design firm founded by Jack Juratovic and Jack Purcell, developed the car. Witzenberg writes that Motortown manufactured the parts and affixed them to Mustang IIs. Finally, the completed cars were shipped to Ford dealers. The COBRA II package added $325 to the price of the car and could be had with a 2+2 with any engine. It added stripes, a blackout grille, rear quarter louvers, COBRA insignias, a non-functional hood scoop, front and rear fiberglass spoilers, and white leather tires. Ford intended for it to be an image builder and didn't think that it would sell very many of them. Initial estimations were pegged at 5,000 units. You could imagine the company's surprise when the final numbers came in. While overall sales fell to about 178,000, a whopping 23,000 of them were equipped with the COBRA II package. The COBRA II was so successful that Ford took over production for 1977. Bringing the line in-house should have brought the price down a bit, but Peter Henshaw notes that it actually went up to $535. With a convertible Mustang nowhere on the horizon, the company added T-tops in the hopes of capturing a similar experience. It was one of the pricier options on the build sheet, coming in at $750. The car was not designed from the outset with this body style in mind. Ford reinforced the floor pad, A-pillar, and windshield, but removing chunks of the sheet metal took its toll. Motor Trend could suss at a bit of rattle in their test car. Its stiff rally suspension only worsened the issue. This was far from a deal-breaker for them. It ended the review by stating that it could make for a prideful and pleasing piece of transportation. It seemed like the Mustang was starting to recapture its sporting pretensions. Sales continued to slip though. Ford only sold about 161,000 of them for 1977. Production fell to a little over 153,000. Mustang, America's favorite pony car, states that this decrease was due in part to a UAW strike. Still, interest in the Mustang II seemed to be waning after its stellar debut. And for the first time ever, the Chevrolet Camaro outsold it. General Motors moved nearly 219,000 of them that year. 1978 was the Mustang II's final year on the market, and Ford wanted to send it off with a bang, relatively speaking. The King COBRA was set to be the performance pinnacle of the entire model generation. Exterior changes included a reverse hood scoop, matte black front grille, darkened taillight surrounds, and a B-pillar band. Contrasting trim was placed on the skirt, spoiler, and windows. And there's also a subtle snake decal on the hood. There wasn't anything too crazy performance-wise, as buyers could simply get the options on a standard Mustang II. The package included power steering, power brakes, and the rally package. All King COBRAs were equipped with the 302 V8. That much is indicated by some distinctive badging on the hood scoop. This was the first Mustang with the vaunted 5.0 badge. All of this added $1,253 to the price of a standard model. AutoWeek's test car had a sticker price of $6,162. It summed up its thoughts on the car by writing, "The King COBRA isn't for the driver anyway. It is for the person who thinks he's a racer." Year-over-year production was up 11% to about 192,000. Sales in its final model year are up to about 179,000. The Mustang II would go no further. The times were changing, and the car wouldn't be able to keep up with them. As the industry clawed its way out of the Melee's era, Ford needed a Mustang that was more efficient, more aerodynamic, and more exciting. And with strict cafe standards on the way, Ford had no time to waste. Iacocca and the team were surely hard at work on the new car, right? About that. From the outside, it seemed as if Iacocca was set to succeed Henry Ford II as CEO of the company. A rift that had been festering between the two had finally come to a head. In April 1977, a few years before the Deuce was set to step down from his role, he reorganized the automaker's leadership structure. Now, it was comprised of him, Iacocca, and Philip Caldwell. Another shakeup was in store for 1978, when Caldwell was named the Deputy Chief Executive Officer. He reported to Henry Ford II directly. Iacocca, in turn, would have to report to Caldwell. In June of that year, he brought his brother Henry Clay Ford into the mix. An LA Times article shed some light on the next events. It includes an incident detailed in the book, Henry, A Life of Henry IV II by Walter Hayes. The text states that Iacocca attempted a coup against his boss. He went to the board of directors and argued that Henry IV II was no longer up to the task of guiding the company. He was in China at the time, though word got back to him about the event once he returned. Henry IV II demanded a vote of confidence on July 12th, saying, "When a man does what Iacocca has done when my back is turned, I have no alternative but to seek a vote of confidence. It's me or Iacocca." While Lee denied the story, several other company figures confirmed it in the article. On the 13th, he was summoned to Henry's office and promptly fired. When asked for a reason, Henry responded, "I just don't like you." Iacocca retired from the automotive industry on October 15th. This break was only temporary. Chrysler hired him in the hopes that he could guide them out of bankruptcy. With the decade nearing its end, he, the Mustang, and Ford Motor Company were set to write their next chapters.